Okay, in this video I'm going to show you how I installed a radio in my Yamaha Wolverine X4. What I ended up going with was a Rockville RGH R2 Marine gauge style head unit, and went with Powell 5 1/4 inch speakers in the front and Rockville 6 1/2 in the rear, and they look the same, so I'm assuming that Powell and Rockville are essentially the same company. But I put the speakers in the Yamaha roof, ran the wires through the cage, come out there, went under the dash into the head unit, and the driver's side I did over there as well. So I'll go through and show you the steps I did to get this installed. Okay, to make it easier for me to cut the holes in the roof, I'm going to take the roof off and lay it upside down so I can work on it. And so that's going to entail taking out, I think it's 18 10mm bolts. Okay, now let's see if I can get this off without dropping it. Go over and flip it over without dropping it. All right. Before I took the roof off, I actually sat in the vehicle and kind of spot checked where I wanted these speakers to be, and I chose places where I thought they'd be a little more protected from the elements, from mud slinging in from the tires. I have seen above the rear seats, I've had this area covered in mud before, so I chose to put the rear speakers, not the seekers, the speakers right behind the driver's head, which is usually right in here, and rear passengers sit in this area. So it'd be right in front of them, and then the front speakers were kind of inbound. I originally would like to have had them out here on the edges. I think it would have sounded better for left to right separation, but I'm just afraid. I don't know if you can see in this side, but there's mud there from being slung up from the front tires. So trying to protect them, I'm just putting them inbound. So I'm using the seals, or the foam seals that go with the speakers, as a template to trace out where I need to cut. On the rear, there's a little wider part here to the center channel, whether you call that channel, and so I'm using that because I don't want the trim of the speakers to run off the side of these lips. I want it to be as flush as I can get it. All right, so working on the front speaker, what I'm going to do is drill 2 holes close together so that I can fit a jigsaw blade in and trim that out. Now when I get around into this area, this raised edge here is going to cause problems with my jigsaw, so I may end up finishing that out by hand with a small hand saw. Pretty sure that's what I'll do, but it may take forever to cut. So let's go ahead and get started here. Got my shop caps coming into the way here. Watch out, guys. Watch out now. The first cut's the most nervous. Not really any turning back now. I'm just going to work my way around on this. Left just a little edge there. I can get under that. Pull it up. There we go. Look how dusty that was in there. Not too bad, but still gets dust in there. All right, 1 down, 3 to go. Now that made a pretty good mess, all those little black shavings. That's got the front two, the rear two speaker holes. And I read where somebody else had done this. I can't remember their name. But read it on a Facebook group, and they advised to make sure you take time to clean out all the black specks, or you will continually find them falling out and snowing black snowflakes all over you on your next ride. Looking at that, it would be nice to put two more in the back and have a 6-speaker system and get you an amplifier, 4-channel amplifier, maybe run 4 off the amplifier and then run 2 off your head unit. Maybe put some smaller speakers up front or off to the sides for some highs. But I believe the highs aren't going to be the problem. I believe the lows will be what's going to be desired after we put this system in. And I'm thinking of maybe hanging a small underseat subwoofer right there in the center, which would be above the rear passengers. I don't know. That'll certainly be future, but holes are cut. Now to do a little bit of cleanup, I'm going to vacuum those out and blow everything out with some compressed air. I'm going to go around with a little 100 grit sandpaper. Okay, if you've bought any speakers before, you know that the speaker wires that come with these things are thin, they're not long. I think this is about 9 feet, but it's maybe 22 gauge at best. So I'm not going much better, but I do have some oxygen-free 18 gauge, and I'm going to use that instead to run from the speakers out to the roll bar, down, well, I hate to call it a roll bar, but the cage, and then down through the cage. And I'm going to put quick connects, or my plan is to put quick connects at the bar, so if I have to take the roof off again, I can disconnect the speakers quickly and then run that on down to the stereo. I've decided I'm going to solder these connections to the speakers just to cut down on any oxidation and contact issues. I'll probably hate myself for that in the future, the first time I need to change these, but I do have just a small 18 to 24 inch piece of speaker wire that I can pull out and replace, or I can cut them off and put spade connectors in the future. All right, I've got those two soldered. 8 more connections to go. So, made a mistake, soldered the connections before I had the seal in place, but I did find that I can just stretch this out a little bit and it'll slide right over. Okay, I'm going to screw these in using the screws that came with the speakers. I would have preferred to have used a metal insert clip similar to the ones that the roll bars use instead of screwing just into the plastic, but this plastic's fairly thick. Maybe 1/8 inch, and the speakers really don't weigh that much, so I'm not real concerned with them falling out. I'm going to run these in with a drill, and I'm going to finish them out by hand so that I don't over torque and crack the plastic housing. All right, 3 more to go. Before I install this 4th speaker, the reason I chose these Rockville and Powell speakers, which look to be the same manufacturer, if I haven't said that before, was their mounting depth. The mounting depth is, I think, 0.9 inches. Very, very shallow mounting depth, so that it will fit inside the factory Yamaha Wolverine headliner. or roof headliner. Wow. But they'll fit in there with clearance to spare. All right, there's the 4 speakers installed. Got to get this roof back on the machine, run the wires through the roll cage, which I'll do before I put the roof on. I brought the speaker wires out. This hole that was in the factory roof, it's about a hand's width in front of the upper tie bar behind the passenger and driver's head. And there's actually a hole in the factory cage that is right next to those holes. So let's get this back on the machine and see what we can do. I found some 16 gauge, looks like 16 gauge, maybe 18 gauge primary wire, single wire. I'm going to use that to run the wiring through the cage down to the bottom, so that I can use it as a puller or pull string to pull the actual speaker wire through. So let's see how fun this is going to be. All right, so I finally got it. It took me a long time, and I finally prayed about it, and there it came. Hooked it right in. I could see the tape, or I used masking tape. I could see the tape through the hole, but I could not hook it. And I finally, like I said, prayed a little bit, and the Lord helped me hook it up. So there's the hole. Let's see, right here. You can't see that, but there's the hole that I'm running it through. And so now I'm going to tie my speaker wire to this cable, or this wire, and try to pull it on through and get it down through here. And what I've got is a piece of coat hanger here that I've kind of bent into a small hook that'll fit through the hole, and I can hook these wires. It takes a lot of work, but as I said, do a little praying and it'll make it a lot easier. All right, my friends, we're back. I've got both driver and passenger side pulled, and I will tell you that the driver's side went much smoother after I pulled the passenger, because I learned on the driver's side I was trying to pull both of these wires taped together at the same ends. I learned, or on the passenger side, I was trying to pull them together, and I learned if I taped the second wire farther back on the first and pulled the first wire through to get it through the hole, and then get it on through the hole, and then pull the second one through, that worked much better. So I've got both sides pulled. I've got my wires laid there in the center, waiting for the head unit. Sorry, I'm moving the camera all over as I move these wires. And that's going to be my next step. Well, my next step is to reinstall the roof. And I'm going to get some quick connects, similar to what I have in a Jeep for a sound bar. Some quick connects to connect these two on each side to the roof. That way, if I need to take the roof off again in the future, it'll be a quick pop of these connectors, and I can just take the roof off. So I found these little connectors, 4-pin connectors, male and female. I'm going to wire the male end to the speakers on the roof end, and the female end is going to go on coming from the radio, and that way when those two are snapped together, it will tuck back down in this hole, and I can push them up in the roof a little bit, so they're not actually hanging out. I thought about using, or actually I purchased the 4-pin trailer harness, and that's what I was going to use at first. It's too large to fit in the hole, but it's black connectors. They'd kind of blend in well with the roof. But then I found these 4-pin connectors laying around, and thought, man, that's absolutely what I want to use. So we're going to get those soldered on. Put some heat shrink on. got those soldered in. I'm going to move on to the stereo wires now. So I've already stripped the wiring here. I'm going to solder those in. I don't have a pin pusher to push these female pins out. I was able to get the male pins out, so that's why I could solder directly to the pins. So let's move on. We got those connectors soldered on, heat shrink running inside the tubes. And I also did the bottom where it comes in, where it comes out of the lower cage. Got that heat shrink and ready. I'm going to run this some wire loom, tuck it down in here, and run it over to the center where the stereo is going to be installed in this area. Got the roof back on. I got the connections made. Well, on this side, the driver's side, still hanging loose. Haven't gotten that side yet. But I got the connections made here, and I'm going to just push those right up in the hole. Something like that. Make sure it's not under too much tension. And there you go. Fairly clean. I don't like seeing the white connector. I'll get that moved on back. But I want to make sure my wires aren't under too much tension. I got the speaker wires pulled down to the behind the dash. I didn't do a video of removing the dash, taking out these five Allen head bolts, and I think there's four 10 millimeter nut bolts there. But I've got the wires pulled in wire loom. I pulled those down through these holes here in the dash. I pulled those down through there, heat shrinked up to the wire loom and over the wire loom, down through, and then behind the dash, right in there. Let's see if I can turn my light on. Right in this area here is where the radio is going to come through. So you check your clearances when you buy a radio to make sure it's going to fit between this transmission intake and your dash. Right in the center of the dash, I don't know if you can see that very well, I've marked the circle. The outer circle is the hole that needs to be cut for the gauge style radio that's going in. Alright, the hole's cut and the radio's in. Well, the radio wires are in. I'm going to go ahead and insert that in. Got my wires pulled back to the right side because that's where I want them coming to. It's easier to access them on that side. I'll get that bolted in on the back side. So man, to put a radio in, who thought you'd have to disassemble the whole center column? Well, I did that because, as you can see right here, my transmission intake, I had to loosen it so that I could get to the bolts on the back of the radio to put this bracket on, because I could not get my hand between the intake pipe and the radio to put these little bitty nuts and washers, 7 millimeters, on there. So we had to do that. Had to move the pipe over, and had to take my I'm gonna call that the drive-by wire piece. That's where the throttle cable connects to. I had to take it off, that bolts right here, and drop it down so that I can move this over. I got it bolted in, and I put some vacuum line sealing caps on the back of those bolts to keep them from rubbing. Well, they shouldn't contact, but if they do, I don't want them to end up wearing a hole in that transmission intake tube. Got the radio all wired in. The wires are zip tied out of the way for the most part. I've got to clean that up just a little bit more and put the outer dash cover back on and tie in my radio constant for memory. There's the wires tucked in. That's actually a really nice connector on that Rockville stereo. It's got a nice seal in there. I also put dielectric grease on all the terminals and on the antenna connector before I ran it in. I can't find where the antenna connector is now. It's tucked down here. There it is. I need to tape that up. And for the antenna, I use a small stick-on antenna right there. It'll probably come loose, but it does pick up radio decent in here, although the primary goal for this, I believe, is going to be to use the Bluetooth. I realize I still need to put that drive-by-wire throttle control in. I don't know the proper term. I need to put that back in. And then make sure the wires don't interfere with it, or it doesn't interfere with wires and vice versa. For those of you that have ever had the center console out of a X4, you know how much fun it's getting ready to be to put this back in. Just have to squeeze right in the middle. I have to be careful now because with the radio in, the front's going to want to hit that radio. So I'm trying to slide it down over the shifter and the parking brake. I take that out. The rubber surround around the parking brake. Oh, that made it a lot easier. Get this front tab on the driver's side and underneath these raised areas for the switches. If you found an easier way, leave them in the comments. Aside from taking it to the dealer. Letting them do it. You've got these two tabs on the front of this console, here and here. And this one over here gets hung underneath this lip. Similar to the lip right here. That's underneath these switch holes. I have trouble every time that I try to put this in. So if you have any tips, if you have an X4 or an X2, and you find a way to get those in easier, leave them in the comments. Shoehorn it in. It's not going to work. I'm going to end up having to pry it. There you go. I'm sure there's an easier way. Alright, radio's in. All the interior panels, seats, all that's back together. I've tested out the radio. It works pretty well. I won't do it here because the microphone on the camera obviously not going to pick up and do any justice. I will say the screen is bright. That backlight is bright, much brighter than the factory Yamaha speedometer and gauge cluster at the top. So if you do any night riding, that's probably going to be maybe a hindrance or aggravation. I haven't found any way to dim it. Maybe put a piece of tinted tape or something across the screen. I'm going to deal with it for a while and see how it does. May not need anything. But that came out pretty good. I've got my USB cord hanging through the switch panel there temporarily. I'm going to end up getting, or I plan to get, a through dash USB panel that'll go here. Clarion makes a nice one. The only problem is most of those panels come with like 15 feet of cord, or 10 feet of cord, way more than I need. I only need like a 6-inch extension, so I may see what else I can find. For my constant wire for the memory, I came through this hole in the front panel there, right by the battery. It came up and tied in right here under this terminal, which goes to the battery constant. I did put a fuse block in there. I've got a 5 amp fuse in there. I could probably go down to a 2.5 amp or even a 1 amp or smaller if I can find one. But I did put the smallest I had was a 5, so that's what I put in there. So we're getting ready to head out for Hatfield McCoy trails in the morning. It is somewhere between 12:30 and 1 a.m. So I'm going to button this back up and put the hood on it, turn my lights out, and go inside and get some rest so we can head out. Thanks for watching.